Dr. Bentson, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to being here with you and talking all things functional medicine today.
Good deal. I'm excited to talk to you because we're going to dive into a subject that is definitely not addressed enough, I think. And a lot of people just suffer with problems instead of really getting true answers. So I'm hoping we can give a lot of people some answers today. But first and foremost, let's go first with who are you?
Well, that is a great question. So I am trained and certified in functional medicine through the Institute for Functional Medicine. And I also have a master's degree in nutrition and a background as a doctor of chiropractic. So kind of a wide scope of holistic treatments that we offer to patients. And I currently live and practice in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which is a really kind of unique and fun spot to be raising our family. We have 2 boys. And for the past few years, I've also been homeschooling. So it's every day is quite an adventure, to say the least.
Now, I'm just curious now, are you still homeschooling because of COVID shutdowns, or did you realize they did better once they were home?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. So initially we, started homeschooling because of COVID, but my kids love it, so much. And we've developed a really great community of homeschooling families, and they've just decided they want to continue homeschooling. So we've been continuing homeschooling, and we actually plan to continue next year. And I work alongside of my husband, Dr. Scott Bentson. So the 2 of us own and run our practice together. And so sort of a collaborative effort on the homeschooling and the practice running.
Yeah. Sounds like a very big tag team effort going on.
It's definitely a big tag team effort, but it's great. And we really love it. It's great for our family. And, it's great to be able to teach them these habits, these health habits as they're young and growing, and good for them to see kind of us working in this arena too. So it's all good.
That's awesome. Well, what I want to talk about first is what functional medicine is, because I know the term is getting more common. It's not that it's just thrown out there, but it's getting more common. But I think a lot of people might not actually know what it is when they hear the term. So what is functional medicine?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so functional medicine is really it's a system of looking at the body, and it's looking at the body through the lens of a matrix and looking to systems of the body and focusing on imbalances. And rather than say, in a more traditional approach, a lot of times they look to name and tame diseases. In functional medicine, we're really looking to find the root cause, the imbalance, kind of the cause of the disease itself. So I'm not really as focused on necessarily, diagnosing the disease and, finding the pill for every ill. We're really looking to establish, what is an underlying imbalance that this patient is experiencing, and then how is that creating this condition that they're experiencing. And so we're really looking very much to epigenetics. So when we look at and think about epigenetics, I always tell patients to think of their life like this long movie, and their cells are like the actors in the movie, and then their genes are like the script. And so their cells are following along this genetic script, and everybody is given a different genetic script, right? I mean, for some people, it's like they just get this amazing genetic script. It's like, good for you, like it just goes so well. For most of us, I feel like we have a pretty decent genetic script with a couple of funky scenes. And for some people, it really is just a very challenging genetic script, but your genes are not your destiny. And that's very much also a major tenet of functional medicine, is saying, there are these epigenetic factors at play. And so we look at epigenetics like the director of the movie. So how are your genes being directed based on lifestyle? And then looking at these specific lifestyle factors and determining how they can be causing those genes to express. So primarily, we're really looking at factors such as nutrition, exercise, physical activity, stress management, and stress transformation, how patients are, managing and dealing with stress in their bodies. We're looking at sleep. We're looking at exposure to environmental factors. So we're very much looking to lifestyle first, to see where there could be imbalances and then how those imbalances are, creating that genetic expression. So, and that's what epigenetics really is. It's saying, okay, how are our genes expressing based on these lifestyle factors? And we know that so many chronic diseases can be prevented or modulated by modulating those lifestyle factors.
Awesome. That's a great explanation. And it's so fascinating when you start really diving into so many, there's a lot of genetic testing you can get now to see, what your DNA has, what your could in the future. And
yeah,
that so much of that just comes down more to if you turn the gene on or not is pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg, with that. But yeah, I think beginning to understand, okay, how do these, these gene SNPs, these single nucleotide polymorphisms, like how those are expressing in our body. And, I think there's just a lot to learn. And I think we're just starting to really learn how to use that information in a clinically useful way. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're really starting to understand it, which is exciting. It's very exciting.
Definitely. Now with what you do you ever use traditional medications, or is it solely lifestyle change and holistic things?
Yeah. And so, it really depends. So the Institute for Functional Medicine, they certify practitioners of all different clinical professions, different areas of medicine. So there are medical doctors, DOs, there are chiropractors, there are nurse practitioners. So there are acupuncturists. So it really kind of runs the spectrum. And so a practitioner who is a medical doctor, some of those types of licenses, they will prescribe medication. But if you see a doctor of chiropractic or an acupuncturist or a naturopath, they won't be using medication, in the course of their protocols or treatments. So it really depends on the type of provider, that you would see. But I do know that there are, medical doctors who continue to prescribe in functional medicine. But really the crux of it is, again, not the pill for every ill, but finding those underlying imbalances, but using medication when necessary. And I work alongside of, rheumatologists and gastroenterologists and many, primary care doctors. And so it's a very collaborative effort. It's not saying that a patient would never need a medication or there's no place for it. I mean, that's certainly not, the tenor. It's really standard of care plus. So, whatever the standard of care is for your specific healthcare profession, it's saying we're going above and beyond that. And again, really looking to lifestyle imbalances.
Awesome. Very cool. So I know kind of another term that's thrown around a lot that is very related to what you do because of how it relates to everything in the body is the microbiome.
Yeah.
First off, what is the microbiome?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And again, like tip of the iceberg, right? I think we are just on the edge of medical understanding when it comes to the microbiome. But I feel like this is the most exciting, and for me, really the most clinically useful area of research that's been evolving, and it's evolving so quickly. So the microbiome, it really is looking at the microorganisms that are in your body, and we are, from what science is telling us, we are perhaps more bacterial than we are cellular, and there are some who are saying like exponentially more, and some who are saying maybe a little bit less. Maybe the human cells went out, to a degree, and for every person, it's a little bit different. But we, have come to realize and understand, we have hundreds of different species of these bacteria. And also when we're looking at the microbiome, we could also be talking about the mycobiome, which is yeast or, fungus, protozoa. We have many of these microorganisms that are living, they're living with us. So, but, we're thinking that, more bacterial than cellular, human cells, more bacterial DNA than human DNA. And when you really start to process that, you start to understand the clinical impact of the microbiome and how it could be, impacting everything from not only digestive health, but, we're now linking mood disorder or skin disorders, or, so especially when it comes to the gut microbiome. Now, the gut microbiome, we have trillions of bacteria that are in our gut. And, estimates are anywhere from 300 to 500 different species of bacteria in our gut. And these bacteria, are responsible for a lot of processes in the body, from metabolism to us breaking down our food. These bacteria that live with us, they eat what we eat. They get stressed when we're stressed, so they really play a tremendous role in our overall health. And we're just starting to map these bacteria and begin to understand, again, their clinical impact. Your microbiome is like a fingerprint. It is completely unique to you. And I always say it's like the sum of all of your parts, right? So as an infant, were you delivered vaginally, or, were you delivered via C-section? Did your parents let you play in the dirt, or was it like hand sanitizer all day, every day? Did you have a lot of antibiotics growing up, or, do you have more recent antibiotic exposure? What kind of food do you eat? How much exercise? How do you sleep? So there's so many different components that make up this microbiome. And, when we're talking about those bacteria, we can really break them up into like 3 different types. We could say they're beneficial, they're harmful, or they're opportunistic. In other words, these bacteria, wow, they help our body to, produce the feel good, happy neurotransmitter serotonin, like awesome, right? They help us to, break down food and, so yay, like that's great. But then there are some that are really harmful to the body. And then there are some that are opportunistic, like they're ready and waiting to be harmful to the body. So it's this sort of fine line and this dance, that we have. And really the goal, and one of the, main areas of functional medicine is really looking to gut health and seeing how gut health really can impact overall health. Because we know that changes in that microbiome, and we call this dysbiosis. So these are negative changes in gut bacteria, where we have more of those harmful bacteria, more of those opportunistic bacteria, less of the beneficial bacteria, or even just less diversity overall, can have pretty significant clinical impacts for people. And that's something you and I could definitely unpack more too, because I think that's, I think that's a big, piece of the equation for a lot of people, especially if they're suffering from gut dysfunction, is an underlying dysbiosis.
Yeah. And I do want to dive into that, but something, and not that I want to go down this rabbit hole, but something that you said is something I've been considering for a while, is like what I'm calling COVID kids.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see, for like kids from like 0 to 2 right now who grew up with sanitizer everywhere, face masks everywhere. It'll be interesting what happens with their immunity and everything as they get older.
Yeah. I think time will definitely tell, but it is going to be interesting, to see. And we're becoming hyper sanitized, and it's definitely, impacting our gut microbiome. And we're seeing, more atopic dermatitis and allergy, and, just more gut dysfunction overall. I mean, 1 in 7 people have IBS. I mean, it's like, these are significant numbers that we're talking about, and many people live with, some form of gut dysfunction. So it's pretty common at this point.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the dysbiosis. We do want to dive into the IBS, but let's talk about dysbiosis and this, like, why does this happen? How does this happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and there can be, a variety of reasons, but if we talk about like the most common, from what I see, it really is like a processed kind of standard American diet can definitely be at the root, of these dysbiotic changes. And, it can also be high stress. We see in people who have high levels of stress that they tend to have higher levels of dysbiosis. And then it becomes a chicken and an egg sort of scenario, because we know that stress creates dysbiosis, and we know that dysbiosis creates mood disorder. So it's like it's a vicious cycle that many patients find themselves in. But stress can definitely be a root cause of dysbiosis. Lack of sleep can be a root cause of those negative changes in the gut bacteria. Environmental factors, toxin exposure can play a role. For some people, they don't have enough stomach acid. We're always looking to give people who have any kind of reflux, proton pump inhibitors and bring down the acid levels. And, we do that. And then we create, dysbiosis in the small intestine, or SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, so there can be a variety of causes, but I would say, what's most common, and I see a lot of times in my practice, really comes down to lifestyle. And it really is, diet based. We're looking at, again, changes in sleep. A lot of people just aren't sleeping well, sleeping enough, and they're under a lot of stress. And that really kind of sets the stage for dysbiosis.
What impact does antibiotic use have on that?
Definitely. Yeah. So that can definitely play a role as well. And so especially we see in patients who have, chronic exposure, especially to antibiotics, or, we even in functional medicine, the Institute for Functional Medicine very much trains its practitioner to take a timeline. So we actually start at birth and we work our way up to the current day with each patient. And we, even examine like what was the antibiotic use, in childhood, and how, does that play a role? So unquestionably, I think exposure to antibiotics, especially over time, can, have a significant impact on the gut microbiota. And that's where probiotics can really shine for a lot of these patients if, there's a need for an antibiotic. But I think it's kind of known across the board that antibiotics have been overprescribed, and I think there's some call to action on, being more judicious in, the prescription of antibiotics, especially in young kids, as, they're really forming and their gut is forming. And so I think there's definitely a call to action there to, reduce our dependence on antibiotics. And now we're finding probiotics are a lot of times for a lot of, especially say like gut infection or disorder, or, H. pylori, for example, the triple therapy or antibiotic therapy has been kind of standard of care, but now they're saying, wait, even if we just give patients probiotics, that's enough to modulate the gut bacteria in a way that, could quell that infection. So it's interesting. We're kind of at the tip of the iceberg here, but yeah, absolutely. Antibiotic use can set people up for dysbiosis.
So you mentioned probiotics as a way to help start restoring things. What else can people do to, like, if they have severe dysbiosis or just have been on antibiotics and wiped out their gut health? Like, what can people do to start restoring things?
Yeah, I think diet, hands down, is key. I think, first and foremost, working to unprocess the diet. And what I always champion for all my patients is, especially if they're getting started, read every food label, and you want to look for added sugar, numbers, and chemicals. Red dye number 40, polysorbate number 80. Like, don't eat numbers, okay? And watch for the chemicals, and really work to unprocess the diet. Eat from the earth, not a test tube. Focus on, foods that are grown in the ground, brightly colored foods, and very important for restoring, the microbiome is variety of diet, which many people kind of eat the same 50 foods over and over again, but our bodies really need, that exposure to a good variety of different kinds of foods. And for people who can tolerate them, fermented foods, are also really helpful. And I would say, that's all very impactful, for many people who are dealing with dysbiosis or these changes in the gut bacteria. I would also say for many people, and this is where working with a functional medicine provider, a certified provider, and you can really find a certified provider by going to the ifm.org, and they have a find a provider page, but working with someone one-on-one to really establish what's going on, particularly with your gut health, I think is really important. And, I think doing those GI map testing or SIBO breath testing and looking to see, what kind of diet would really be the best for you. But for many patients, the low Fodmaps diet is, it's a total game changer. So I'm not sure if you're very familiar with the low Fodmaps diet or have experience with that, but I'd be happy to kind of talk about that a little bit more if you think.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, but why don't you dive into it for anyone who's not?
Yeah, that's great. And I actually wrote a book on this. So the Cool Girl's Guide to the Fodmap Diet. And I know guys have IBS too. Okay. So I've gotten like so many comments on that. So that will be my next book. But I wrote it for girls of all ages who are dealing, with digestive issues. The low Fodmaps diet, what we're looking to do is to reduce the amount of fermentable carbohydrates that are taken in through the diet. And when we do this, it really can help to modulate the gut bacteria in a beneficial way and to reduce inflammation in the gastrointestinal system. And there's so much literature now supporting the use of a low FODMAPs diet for a host of gastrointestinal disorders, not just IBS, but also SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, for even inflammatory bowel disease. I see clinically such good results. So, but what we're looking to do, it's kind of like there's this pot on the stove and the pot's like about to boil over. And for anybody who has digestive issues, they can probably really feel this, right? It's like, so their pot is getting up to a boil, they eat something, and the next thing they know, like their entire system just feels like it's exploding, okay? And so the idea with the low FODMAPs diet is to bring that whole pot down to a simmer. And we do that by reducing the amount of food that they're intaking that contains these fermentable carbohydrates. Now, every single carbohydrate ferments, okay? Every single one. So, but some carbohydrates ferment more quickly than other carbohydrates. And so what we work to do is reduce that amount over a 30-day period of time. So really focus only on the foods that are low in fermentable carbs. And I should say this, so FODMAP is an acronym for people who haven't heard of this before. So it's fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. So these are just the different types of carbohydrates. And so we're looking to reduce that whole load over a 30-day period of time, and then systematically reintroduce or challenge in those different fermentable carbohydrate types one at a time to see specifically which foods the patient might be sensitive to. And I see this be incredibly impactful for people, and it really resonates, with them when they start to make this connection between their gut symptoms and gut dysfunction, and how this diet can really improve significantly those symptoms. And I know you work with a lot of, runners and, a lot of athletes. And this is where, we see a lot of athletes have, a lot of gut dysfunction, so especially more like elite athletes, endurance athletes, this is like a known phenomenon. And a lot of times, they're running and they're hitting these gels and they're, engaging in like these sports drinks and different things that are very high fermentable, very high in fermentable carbs. And so it's kind of like adding fuel to the fire and, increasing their diarrhea or gas, bloating, any of those kinds of symptoms.
Is that the primary reason, kind of diving into the whole impact on runners, is that the primary reason that like so many runners have the digestive issues? Because I'm like, I know from when I was running in high school, like you always joked about like the runner shots and like all that stuff.
Yeah.
And is it primarily the carbohydrates, or is there something else going on in a runner or endurance athlete's body?
And I think every person is different. And again, I think it's important to kind of individualize it and determine, again, like back to the root cause. So, every person could potentially have a different, root cause, but definitely like irritable bowel syndrome is common in runners. And I'll say this too, a lot of times people are given a diagnosis of irritable bowel syndrome. And I still think it's important, like if you've been given that diagnosis, to still look to identify, is there still a cause of the cause? Is there still something underlying that's causing that irritable bowel syndrome? So for a lot of patients I see, it is a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or, they have exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, or, so I think for every person, like if it's really an issue and it's, decreasing the quality of your runs or your athletic performance, like working with someone one-on-one to identify what's at the root cause is really important. But I would say, in general, I think there can be a couple of different reasons. Would I say that a high FODMAP approach to food could be one of those root causes, like absolutely. And I think it absolutely adds fuel to the fire. Like I look at a lot of these, foods that are promoted, for athletes. And I'm looking at the ingredients and I'm going, oh my word, like we're destroying these people's guts. Like, so, and I think I'm happy to share with you a couple alternatives, to those if you're interested in that as well. But I do think for a lot of people, yes, that could be a root cause. But I also think that, studies show that runners tend to have higher increased intestinal permeability, which can also be, kind of a part of this. And, over exercise can create those inflammatory changes in the gut, which can also, be problematic. When you're running, especially if you're running a race, right? So there's a difference between like running, because you're like, yeah, it feels good. It's like restorative running, right? And then like competitive running, like I have to crush my time. And, those are two different ends of the spectrum. And when we're looking especially more at the competitive running, you're putting yourself into a sympathetic mode, right? So we've got these two parts of the nervous system. You've got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and the sympathetic is fight or flight, and the parasympathetic's rest and digest. And when you're running, you're putting your body into that fight or flight mode, and when you do, it does create some ischemia or like lack of blood flow to the intestines, right? So when that happens, a lot of times we get these inflammatory changes, and that alone can promote the GI dysfunction. So again, it's like there can be multiple causes, but I would definitely say, ways to look at this clinically is definitely to, trial a low Fodmaps diet. I think that can be helpful. I think the probiotics can definitely be helpful, and I also think working to reduce like stress, especially around competitive running, with, the deep breathing exercises and, those kinds of things can also be really helpful to, help pull your body from sympathetic more in balance. I think that can be, I think that can be helpful too. So did that answer your question?
It did. And I do want to dive into like foods for athletes a little bit too, just because I'm the same way. I look at these different things that are made for athletes and I just cringe. I'm like, there's like a handful of things that I will, like me personally, will actually purchase. Then like, okay, there's actually no food product or ingredients in here, but most very cringeworthy when we talk about the like overall health of the body. So what sort of things do you suggest for athletes?
Yeah. And so again, like if we're talking about the general food approach, I think always the baseline is, choosing as many, foods of color as you can get. I think that's important. And I think, eating from the earth, watching all of your labels, and, if it's got the sugar numbers and chemicals, really working to, avoid those. And when it comes to low Fodmaps diet, I think that's a big conversation to just kind of map out and lay out exactly, which foods are problematic and which foods are the best. But, that could definitely be a better conversation, like maybe for another day. I would say for competitive, food sources, and, a lot of the sports drinks, I think people are kind of wising up to the ingredients put in the sports drinks. And I said earlier to eat a lot of foods of color, but never fluorescent. Okay. So if something is fluorescent, like don't eat or drink that. Right.
That's awesome.
So, and I think a lot of athletes, like they're so in tune with their bodies, and then they're like, putting fluorescent things in. So, I mean, that's just like not going to work. Okay. So I think instead of a lot of those sports drinks, I'm a fan of LMNT. Have you seen that product at all? Or yeah. So that's a great one. And I see people do very well with that. And I like to, there's a brand Untapped. Are you familiar with that at all?
I've heard of that.
Actually
I'm overly familiar with it.
Yeah. So I think their website is like untapped.cc, but they have like maple syrup derived products. And so with all just, whole food ingredients and nothing sketchy. So those can be really good options for athletes, because maple syrup is also going to be low FODMAP, so that's also going to be helpful, because again, even like the honey, any of the honey shots or gels, or, honey is high FODMAP. So you think you're at least doing something natural, and then you're, creating that, increased permeability and dysbiosis and issues, if you're sensitive, and people who are sensitive to it, that can be problematic. But the maple syrup derived foods, that can be, much more helpful. Or the Go macro bars, those are also low FODMAP. So that can be very helpful as well, especially when you're needing, to find quick sources of, carbohydrates. Those can kind of be the best. So
total random question with honey, but I'm curious if you know. So is there, like, with how it processes in the body, is there a difference between like the raw unpasteurized honey compared to like the shelf stable type?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're going to get more of the nutrients from the raw honey. In terms of how it would be processed by your gut as a fermentable carb, that's not going to make any difference. To my understanding, I've never seen anything that would, show that you would have less fermentability in like a raw honey as opposed to, a typical shelf stable honey. But, I think there is some thought that there are higher nutrient densities in those raw and local honeys, especially for people who perhaps have like seasonal allergy, or, I think those are going to be a better bet for those, individuals. And I do recommend, if you can, doing the raw local honey, whenever possible. But from a gut perspective, if we're talking about people who have gut dysfunction or who need to, focus on low FODMAP, that's not going to make any difference. Just no.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
To fructose, I should caveat that. If you're sensitive to fructose, right? So there are different types of fermentable carbs, and we talked about lowering that, fermentable carbohydrate pot down to a simmer, right, for those 30 days. But then as you systematically introduce those back in, you might find that you tolerate fructose well, and then honey's back on the table again. If you don't tolerate fructose well, honey would not be a good choice.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just curious because I use local or raw local honey for allergies, like you said. Yeah. And I'm just like, after it sits like towards the end of the jar, it's like starting to crystallize. And so I'm like, it changes form. So I was just wondering if if it was different. Yeah. Anything.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Cool. So as far as, actually, let's go this direction. Change my mind. Obviously functional medicine is a huge thing. Microbiome is a huge thing. We don't want to go down any like major rabbit holes necessarily, but anything from the like microbiome IBS standpoint that we haven't talked about today that would be really important to bring up?
I think for patients who have been diagnosed with IBS, but they haven't been tested for SIBO, I definitely recommend having a SIBO breath test and working with a practitioner who will help you to get a SIBO breath test done. Because I would say, so many people, they come to me and they find me because, either they've been told that their condition is all in their head, which is so heartbreaking to me as a practitioner. I can't really stand it, or they've just been told like, there's nothing, that can be done to help you like further. There's nothing further that we can do. And so, I think a lot of times we're testing these patients and we're finding, in fact, no, like this is, a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And this can be really well treated and well managed. And those people find like significant, relief. And usually that's a course of, the low Fodmaps diet, the elimination diet and challenge phase. And then also a lot of times herbal antimicrobial therapy, or using and also using probiotics, but they really can find a lot of relief. And so I do think working with someone who can, help you to get tested for SIBO can be helpful. Also looking at exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, or getting a GI map test done, or, some kind of stool testing done. These tests can be, they can really reveal a lot. And again, we're looking to those imbalances, but they can reveal a lot in terms of imbalance. And, with the help of a qualified practitioner, so many of these patients can find so much relief. And I think that is, again, where functional medicine shines is when we're looking at chronic diseases and say, we're looking at thyroid from a different perspective, or eczema from a different perspective. And a lot of times we're looking to gut dysfunction as the root of a lot of these, autoimmune diseases or hormonal imbalances, or, so I think it's important to work with somebody and not just, say, oh, okay, maybe it is all in my head, or I just have to live with it and there's really no other, option for me. Or if you've been told that, what you eat doesn't matter. It's like, yes, it does. It absolutely matters. And you want to work with somebody who will listen to you and really look to find the root of that condition. I believe that conditions are conditional. I think if you find, what is causing that condition, you can impact the outcome of it significantly. And I think it's important for people to realize they're not defined, by a condition or disorder or disease, but really to continue to look for those imbalances that can help to modulate and improve that disorder or disease.
Awesome. I love that. I'm curious, the SIBO breath test, does your, what you exhale become like more alkaline or like alcohol, or like what happens?
No, that's a great question. And so the test that I really advocate for is TrioSmart. And so that TrioSmart test, it's actually kind of newer to the market, but what we're looking for actually is hydrogen, methane, or hydrogen sulfide gas. Okay. So when you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and you breathe into a bag every 15 minutes for a few hours after following a diet, specific kind of diet, and then drinking a glucose or lactulose solution, you're followed by these breath tests. And if you have these gases in your breath, it's a sign, it's showing that you have this bacteria where it doesn't belong and it's overgrowing and it's contributing. So I would say it's very much characterized by, gas and bloating, especially for people who tell me gas and bloating. I start flat as a board in the morning and I wake up doing well. And by 4 p.m. I look 9 months pregnant, So especially for those patients who are dealing with gas, bloating, abdominal distension, diarrhea, they're all so characteristic of hydrogen, SIBO. And then we're looking, we look at methane. There are people who are just backed up, the people who are super constipated. Most of the time we see, in addition to the bloating, gas, abdominal pain, a lot of times they're testing methane positive. And then for the people who tell me that their poop smells like sulfur, it's like a lot of times that is the hydrogen sulfide, so there are really kind of these characteristics. But again, this is something that can be treated. It can be treated conventionally. Xifaxan is the antibiotic that's frequently prescribed, but I find so many people respond incredibly well to herbal antimicrobial therapies. Especially a low Fodmaps diet for these people, a lot of times can really work wonders. And then also, judicious use and really systematic use of probiotics, all the strains, really looking to, both the bifidobacterium and lactobacillus, and then Saccharomyces boulardii, that beneficial yeast. And then the bacillus species, so kind of looking to all of those. And incorporating those together can be, so impactful for these patients. But then again, too, sometimes we need to get to the cause of the SIBO. Okay, it's like, all right, well, what's causing the SIBO? But this is, again, like I know I'm championing this a lot, but working with a certified provider who really has an understanding of this and can help you to really determine uniquely for you, what's at the root of the symptoms can be so impactful and life-changing for so many people.
Yeah. Dr. Bentson, this was all super fascinating, super informative. If someone has more questions, wants to find your book, or just wants to kind of know more about you, where can they find you?
Thanks for asking. So drkristenbenson.com. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. Again, Dr. Kristen Bentson, and there's a T in there, Bentson. So, but I'm on all the major platforms. And then my book, The Cool Girl's Guide to the Fodmap Diet, everything you need to get savvy about and beat digestive issues for life. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Target, kind of all the places. So
very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I greatly appreciate it.
thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.